some of the ideas are contained within the pack. I've put in a sort of introductory PowerPoint. So Elizabeth's asked me to run through it, and I apologise to some of you who might have seen it before. Okay. So families like mostly with a few nuts. So this is basically how you introduce this is up to you, but I'll run through this reasonably quickly. But bearing in mind, ordinarily I would probably take about 40 minutes to run through this, but you can we'll just do it quickly. Okay. If you Google holy, this is what you get, and you also get this, but you also get this guy. Now there's a difference in the perception of what holy is all about, and that's of course what happens in our family lives. We're not quite sure what holy family life looks like. Now, are we happy to mind that gap? Or maybe we're working toward preparing a holy place of thinking about something slightly different. So if you Google holy family, you get these guys, who we all know and love. And if you just Google family, you get these guys. And of course there's a difference, isn't there? There's a huge difference. Now, I've got time to tell a little story about Homer. There's a lovely episode where they come in from church one Sunday, and Homer, the dad, stands at the door and takes his coat off. And he's saying, oh Marge, this is the best time of the week. And he starts taking off actually all of his clothes. He stood there, buck naked. And Marge says to him, Homer, why is this the best time of the week? Is it for the longest time before I've got to go back to church again? and it sort of feels a bit like that, certainly in my household. So here we've got, in a sense, it's probably not standard or normal family, but hey, a family. And again, the difference between holy family and ordinary family, are we happy to mind that gap? Or would we rather see sort of what we can perceive to be family life and holy family life merge? Now, maybe this is how we consider our holy family homes, beacons of hope standing out in the community, where morning and evening prayer is regularly shared, where grace before meals is never missed, and in fact things are so holy, thanks Phil, but even the dog gets in on the act. Now I have a feeling that the reality is somewhat different. Okay, maybe looks a bit like this, or for some a bit like this. This is maybe what our family meals feels like when we're living either by ourselves, especially our sort of priest friends, and single parents of course. And maybe homework and life have us all in a spin and don't know which way we're going. And in fact, if arguments in my house were this civilised, I'd be thrilled to bits. But they're not, often things are thrown. This is sort of, what? And you can add all sorts of things in here if you wanted to take this away and add to other pictures, you could add pictures of your family chaos as well. Anyway, as clay in the potter's hands, do we consider ourselves to be unlikely clay? And I often pause at this point and sort of ask people to consider in which ways their home might be thought of as holy. And what comes out of there is all sorts of different things, but often things like icons feature and blessings, that sort of thing. So often I'll give people a little time to think that through, but we're short on time, so I'm going to rush through. But often that's how we feel as clay sometimes, a bit dried up, needing a bit of moisture, a bit of nurturing, a bit of care. However, we're going to take a step back and think again. When we look after our homes, cleaning them, making sure that kitchen's clean enough so someone can come and just make themselves a quick sandwich before dashing out somewhere else. When we look after an elderly relative, or maybe it's a grown-up child, or maybe it's a sibling. When we're up in the night, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time, to that child that needs our care and attention. And for our priests, that's probably the equivalent of that crying child. When we're doing yet another load of washing, when we look to the wisdom of our elders, and indeed share our wisdom with others. When we give help, when in fact we could do with some help ourselves. When we make all of these sacrifices as parent, sibling, priest, put all of these words in for parent there, grandma, however you want to call it, husband. When we make all of these sacrifices, in fact, home is a holy place. Because God is present there as well. And so that's the first source statement that's in this pack, that the pack starts to unpack further. So it's an introduction to sort of saying, hey, look in here, this is what's involved. And so we're moving on, so I'm going to do this quickly, sorry. When we care for our environment, putting those light bulbs in, when we're taking out the recycling, and when it feels like we're the only one that ever does it, when we care for that dog who prays with us, or indeed the rabbit, or whatever, have the goldfish, whatever it happens to be. When we stand in awe and wonder at God's creation and name it as such, then home is a holy place. Because God's presence graces all of creation. And then we have the second statement that's in this pack, which then can be looked at further. And I might talk about that a bit later on, shall I? And so moving on, when we're a lifeline to those in need, when we care for the hurting, be they young or old, when we stick together through thick and thin, and keep smiling, when we keep talking and communicating, when actually we'd rather not, we've had enough. And this is something that happens often within families, but often in parish, doesn't it? Sometimes sort of think, actually, I've had enough now. Maybe it's just my parish. But when we keep communicating, and keep communicating with God, actually, even when sometimes we don't want to. When we care for the lonely, and indeed sometimes tolerate our own loneliness for the sake of our vocation, or maybe it's for the sake of the children, because we want to enter into a second relationship, because the children have got to be concerned, got to be considered. So when we tolerate our loneliness, then in fact home is a holy place. Because the relationships within the family reflect God's relationships with us. Now, if I'm doing this with a group, each of these three sections, I'd probably give a bit of time for them to sort of think about and unpack and talk about it a bit further, but rushing through. So in a sense, that's the clay we are. We're not unlikely clay. We are clay of people who can gather together to support holding one another up, and that's what as we are as community. And so in a sense, family life, home life is a bit like this. It can be a bit colourless, a bit grey, a bit rough around the edges, dry, sometimes even hairy around the edges, but when considered carefully, contains something of great worth. And so, the holy one, the holy homes, is not the red one, it's all the white ones actually that are holy. But in a sense, that word holy, maybe we need to think about a different language for what we mean by holy, and ask our families to think about what holiness means to them, give them another language in which to think about holy, and for them to realise that the simple things they do are part of their vocation as parents, as family members, as sibling, as grandparent. In as much as that is their vocation, as much as someone's vocation to be a doctor, or to be a priest, or to be a teacher, or whatever it happens to be. And so, families are like fudge. Most of the two nuts. Do you remember the nuts, whole hazelnuts? Cadbury's making this? Remember that? Or am I just too old? Nuts, whole hazelnuts. Okay. Now, can I go on? Okay. What I often then ask them to do is something, I'm sure Elizabeth's going to do it later on with you, I give you think that, okay. Is to pick up an object. And normally I have a basket of things, and Elizabeth's got a little bag of things, which contain just ordinary items from around the house, but you could probably reach in your pocket or in your handbag and find an item, or look around the room and find an item. And I'm not going to spend too long on this, okay? Good. And just to sort of say, okay, holding this item, what's negative about it? What annoys me about it? They can break. Never quite like when you want them to in the middle of that barbecue. What's good about them? Gosh, all the things, those candles that it lights, and the fires it lights, and all those sorts of things. So think about something negative, think about something positive, and then step back and giving them some time to think about the way in which that ordinary thing speaks to them of God. And I'm sure some of you will have done this sort of exercise. And so we can think about, gosh, light of the world, warmth and comfort it brings, and all of those things that God brings to our lives. And you can do it with any item. It's really quite staggering, given a little bit of time. And so instead we have a choice. We have a choice to think about things. In the same way as we have a choice to be sort of either an optimist or a pessimist, we have a choice in family life to think about actually how things are in our lives that speak to us of God. And so in a sense, the whole recipe bowl thing here is that what can be put in the bowl in this recipe for family spirituality. And in a sense, anything can be put in that bowl to make anything can go in the